The invitation had seemed innocent enough, embossed lettering on sky blue cardstock promising the pool party of the summer at Karen Whitman's newly renovated backyard oasis. What the invitation failed to mention was that this would be the last normal day in the lives of everyone who attended. Karen Whitman, 42 and freshly divorced, had poured her settlement money into transforming her suburban backyard into something that belonged in a luxury resort brochure. The centerpiece was a custom-designed pool with an unusual iridescent finish that seemed to shimmer with colors not typically found in nature. The contractor had assured her it was a proprietary blend guaranteed to make her the envy of Oakwood Estates. It's technically experimental, he told her with a conspiratorial wink, but perfectly safe. Developed it myself using minerals from a deep-sea volcanic vent. Gives the water properties you won't find anywhere else. Karen hadn't bothered asking for certification papers or safety documentation. All she cared about was that none of her neighbors, especially not her ex-husband's new girlfriend 3 doors down, would have anything like it. On the afternoon of the party, the late June sun beat down mercilessly on Oakwood Estates. Temperatures had climbed into the high 90s, making Karen's invitation all the more appealing to the 24 guests who arrived bearing covered dishes and bottles of wine. "My God, Karen, it's magnificent," gasped Diane Porter, clutching her pasta salad with one hand and shielding her eyes with the other as she took in the sight of the pool. The water seemed alive somehow, pulsing with a blue-green luminescence even in broad daylight. Karen beamed with pride. "Wait until you see it at night. The whole thing practically glows." "What's that smell?" asked Martin Chen, sniffing the air. "It's like the ocean, but not quite." "Part of the mineral blend," Karen explained vaguely, having no actual idea herself. "Supposed to have therapeutic properties. Good for the skin, the sinuses, even your mood." By mid-afternoon, most of the guests had taken the plunge. The water felt unusually buoyant, almost as if it were cradling their bodies. Some noticed a tingling sensation on their skin, but attributed it to the therapeutic minerals Karen had mentioned. No one paid much attention to 11-year-old Zach Porter when he climbed out of the pool complaining that his legs felt funny. Children were always complaining about something, and his mother Diane was deep in conversation about her upcoming divorce. Zach wrapped himself in a towel and retreated to a corner of the yard, examining the strange, silvery patches that had appeared on his calves. It was Emily Davidson who first noticed something truly wrong. A biology teacher at the local high school, she had been floating peacefully on her back when she realized she hadn't taken a breath in nearly 2 minutes. Startled, she stood up in a shallow end, water streaming from her hair. "Karen," she called, her voice shaking slightly. "What exactly is in this water?" Before Karen could answer, a scream erupted from the deep end. Jessica Wu was staring in horror at her hands, where the skin between her fingers had grown thin and translucent, stretching to form delicate webbing. Karen rushed to the pool's edge, her heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. The contractor had promised it was safe. She paid extra for that guarantee. As panic began to spread among the guests, Karen felt an odd sensation at the sides of her neck. Reaching up with trembling fingers, she discovered 3 small slits had formed just below her jawline. It fluttered gently as she touched them, drawing in oxygen not from the air, but from the moisture on her skin. Somewhere in the chaos, someone called 911, but already the changes were accelerating, and everyone who had entered the water knew with growing certainty that whatever was happening to them was just beginning. The ambulances arrived within 15 minutes, but it might as well have been 15 hours. By then, the transformations had progressed with frightening speed. Paramedics in hazmat suits cordoned off the property, setting up a makeshift decontamination area on Karen's meticulously landscaped front lawn. "This is ridiculous," Karen protested as a paramedic examined the now fully formed gills pulsing at her neck. "It was supposed to be therapeutic. Call Raymond Kessler. He's the contractor who installed this. He has to fix this." The paramedic's face was obscured behind his protective mask, but his eyes conveyed a mixture of fascination and horror. "Ma'am, I've been in emergency services for 12 years. I've never seen anything like this." Across the yard, Emily Davidson, the biology teacher, had taken charge of documenting the changes. Her scientific mind, though terrified, couldn't help but be intrigued by the biological impossibility unfolding around her. She commandeered Karen's iPad and was photographing and recording observations. The transformations appeared to follow an accelerated evolutionary pattern. She dictated into the device, her webbed fingers awkwardly navigating the touch screen. Subject Zach Porter, age 11, shows the most advanced changes, possibly due to his developing physiology. Indeed, young Zach had undergone the most dramatic transformation. The silvery patches on his legs had spread and merged, forming a reflective, scaled surface that extended from his waist to what had once been his feet. Those feet had elongated and flattened, fusing into a graceful tail fin that twitched involuntarily on the pool deck where he lay. "Mom," he called, his voice oddly melodic. "I can't feel my legs anymore, but I'm not scared." It feels right somehow. Diane Porter kneeled beside her son, her own transformation less advanced but clearly progressing. The skin along her forearms had developed a faint blue-green sheen, and each time she blinked, a translucent membrane slid horizontally across her eyes before retracting. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, not believing it herself. At the edge of the property, a black SUV pulled up. Two individuals in dark suits stepped out, flashing credentials at the police barricade. They moved with purpose, ignoring the chaos around them as they made their way to the backyard. "Ms. Whitman." The taller of the two approached Karen. "I'm Agent Fitzgerald. This is Agent Rivera. We're with the CDC's Special Containment Division." "CDC." Karen's voice took on a shrill edge. "This isn't a disease. It's something in the water. My contractor." "Raven Kessler is not a licensed pool contractor," Agent Rivera interrupted, her voice calm but authoritative. "And he's not who we told you he was." "Who was he then?" Karen demanded, suddenly aware that the guests were listening intently, their eyes, many now larger and rounder than normal, fixed on the conversation. "That's classified," Agent Fitzgerald said. "What we can tell you is that the minerals in your pool have certain properties that were never meant to be used in a civilian setting." Martin Chen, whose transformation had manifested as elongated fingers with newly developed claws, stepped forward. "Are you saying this was some kind of government experiment?" The agents exchanged glances. "We're saying," Agent Rivera replied carefully, "that the situation is more complicated than a simple contamination event, and that all of you will need to come with us immediately." A collective murmur ran through the group. Jessica Wu, now sporting delicate, fan-like protrusions behind her ears, voiced what everyone was thinking. "You knew this could happen. You're not surprised at all." "What we know," Agent Fitzgerald said, "is that you're all in the early stages of a very specific genetic reconfiguration. One that, if left unaddressed, will continue until complete." "Complete what?" Karen asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Complete adaptation to aquatic life," Agent Rivera said simply. As if on cue, Zach Porter let out a gasp that was half pain, half wonder. Before everyone's eyes, the last vestiges of his human legs disappeared completely, replaced by a powerful iridescent tail. His skin, now entirely covered in fine scales, caught the late afternoon sunlight and scattered it like a living prism. And most alarming of all, he looked happy. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying a strange musical quality that hadn't been there before, "I need water. Real water. Ocean water." Emily Davidson, still documenting everything, looked up from the iPad. "He's right. These adaptations, they're not just cosmetic. Our physiologies are changing at the cellular level. We're becoming something that can't survive on land. That's why you need to come with us," Agent Fitzgerald insisted. "We have facilities, controlled environments where we can—" "Study us?" Martin Chen interrupted. "Keep us in tanks? Turn us into lab specimens? Keep you alive," Agent Rivera corrected. "Because in about 12 hours, none of you will be able to breathe air anymore." Karen stared at the chaos unfolding in her backyard, the party she had thrown to show off, to make her ex-husband jealous, to prove she was thriving. Now paramedics were loading her webbed and scaled guests into ambulances. Government agents were confiscating phones and making calls about containment protocols. And all she could think was how desperately, suddenly, she wanted to be back in that water. Her skin felt too dry, too tight. The gills at her neck fluttered painfully, seeking moisture. Something deep inside her was changing, awakening, calling her toward the sea. "We don't have much time," Agent Fitzgerald was saying, but Karen barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the glowing pool where ripples formed without anyone touching the surface, as if something beneath was stirring, waiting. The government facility was located underground beneath what appeared to be an abandoned naval research station on the coast. From the outside, it was nothing but crumbling concrete and rusted warning signs. Below was a labyrinth of sterile corridors and reinforced glass. Karen and the others had been transported in specially modified ambulances, essentially mobile aquariums, their rapidly transforming bodies immersed in salt water during the 3-hour journey. By the time they arrived, most could no longer tolerate open air for more than a few minutes. They were separated into individual observation tanks, though they could see each other through the glass partitions. Scientists in white lab coats moved among them, taking readings, collecting samples, making notes with clinical detachment. Karen pressed her webbed hands against the glass of her tank, watching as Diane Porter in the adjacent chamber comforted her son. Zach's transformation was now complete. A shimmering humanoid with the lower body of a fish, his features still recognizably his own but altered. Eyes larger, nose nearly gone, mouth wider. He darted through the water with effortless grace, seemingly unbothered by their captivity. Unlike the others who huddled fearfully in their tanks, Zach explored every inch of his confined space, occasionally pressing against the glass to communicate with his mother through a series of melodic clicks and whistles that somehow, inexplicably, she could understand. He says we shouldn't be afraid, Diane told the others, her voice distorted through the speaker system they used to communicate. He says this is a gift. A gift. Martin Chen's voice crackled through the intercom. His transformation had taken a different path, his hands now clawed. A ridge of spines running down his back, his skin a mottled gray-green. We're prisoners, lab rats. Emily Davidson, the biology teacher, had maintained more of her human features than most. Perhaps because of her scientific mind, she'd been cooperating with the researchers, answering their questions, even suggesting tests. They don't know what to do with us, she observed. They're as confused as we are. Not all of them, Karen replied, her gills fluttering as she spoke. She nodded toward a door where Agent Rivera was engaged in intense conversation with a white-haired man in a lab coat. They knew enough to find us very quickly. Jessica Wu, whose delicate fan-like protrusions had developed into elaborate coral-like structures framing her face, swam closer to her tank's edge. I keep dreaming of the ocean, she said quietly. Not just dreaming, remembering. As if I've been there before. Not as a human, but as whatever we're becoming. A murmur of agreement rippled through the interconnected speakers. They'd all been experiencing the same thing, memories that couldn't possibly be theirs, knowledge they shouldn't possess, the migration patterns of deep-sea creatures, the locations of underwater caves and trenches, the sensation of swimming through darkness guided only by sound and pressure changes. The white-haired man broke away from Agent Rivera and approached the observation area. He studied them silently for a long moment, then pressed a button on a control panel. My name is Dr. Elliot Thorne. His voice echoed through their tanks. I'm the lead researcher on Project Thalassa. I want to apologize for what's happened to you. You did this to us, Karen demanded, her voice carrying a new resonance through the water. Not intentionally, Dr. Thorne replied. Raven Kessler, who you knew as your pool contractor, was one of our researchers. He disagreed with the direction of our work. What work? Emily asked. Dr. Thorne hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Genetic adaptation research. We've been studying certain species from the Mariana Trench, creatures that have developed remarkable evolutionary traits, the ability to withstand crushing pressure, to thrive in oxygen-poor environments, to communicate in ways we're only beginning to understand. You were weaponizing it, Martin accused. We were exploring its potential, Dr. Thorne corrected, though his eyes betrayed him. Kessler believed we were moving too slowly, too cautiously. He wanted to prove that the adaptations could be transferred to humans, so he used us as his test subjects, Karen said bitterly. Yes, Dr. Thorne nodded, but I don't think he anticipated the speed or extent of the changes, or that they would be irreversible. The word hung in the water between them. Irreversible. What happens to us now? Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We're going to make you as comfortable as possible while you study us, Martin interrupted. For how long? Dr. Thorne didn't answer directly. There's something else you should know. The changes you're experiencing, they're not random. There's a pattern, a purpose. What purpose? Emily asked. Communication, Dr. Thorne said simply. The life forms we found in the trench, they're not just adapted to survive. They're adapted to connect with each other, with their environment, and potentially, with what? Karen prompted. Dr. Thorne looked uncomfortable. With something else, something we detected but never seen, something that lives in the deepest parts of the ocean. Young Zach, who had been watching silently, suddenly pressed against the glass of his tank, his eyes wide. He began to make a series of complex sounds, not random, but structured like language. Diane translated, her voice shaking. He says it's calling to us. It's been waiting. For a long time. As if on cue, every light in the facility flickered. The scientists looked around in alarm. One of the monitors displaying vital signs began to show erratic patterns. What's happening? Dr. Thorne demanded, turning to his staff. Seismic activity, someone reported, coming from offshore, directly above the Cascadia Trench. Karen felt it then, a vibration, not just in the water, but in her mind, a presence vast and ancient, stirring from below, and with it came a certainty that filled her with both terror and exhilaration. They weren't meant to stay in these tanks. They weren't meant to be studied. They were meant to go home, to the deep, and something down there was waking up to welcome them. The facility's emergency lighting bathed everything in a pulsing red glow. Alarms blared as scientists rushed between monitoring stations, their voices sharp with urgency. Through the speaker system, Karen and the others could hear fragments of crisis management, tremors increasing in magnitude, Pressure in the deep water monitors is off the scale. Need to evacuate non-essential personnel. Dr. Thorne stood at the central control panel, barking orders. Gone was the apologetic researcher. In his place was a man accustomed to command to crisis. Agent Rivera appeared at his side. "We need to move them," she said, gesturing toward the tanks. "Move us where?" Karen demanded through the intercom. "What's happening?" Neither answered her directly, but Dr. Thorne pressed a button that he thought muted the communication system. It didn't. "It's responding to them," they heard him tell Rivera. Kessler was right. The entity is sentient, and it's connected to them now. "We need to sever that connection," Rivera replied coldly. "How?" "Their transformation is complete, and if the entity is as powerful as our readings suggest." "We have protocols for this," Rivera cut in. "Containment options." Karen's eyes met Emily's across the divide between their tanks. The biology teacher nodded grimly. They both understood what containment options meant. Karen swam to the front of her tank and pressed her webbed hand against the glass. One by one, the others did the same, forming a connective line across their separate chambers. Even Martin, who had been the most resistant to their fate, joined them. And then Zach began to sing. It wasn't a human song. It wasn't even sound as they had known it before. It was vibration and pressure and something else. Something that bypassed their ears and resonated directly in their minds. A calling. A signal. To their astonishment, they found themselves answering, their voices joining in a harmony that seemed to come from somewhere deep within their altered DNA. The water in their tanks began to ripple, then churn. Outside, the scientists backed away, their expressions shifting from clinical detachment to naked fear. One of the monitoring screens exploded in a shower of sparks. Another showed readings from the ocean floor, movement massive and deliberate, rising from the depths. "What have you done?" Dr. Thorne shouted, his voice tinny through the damaged speakers. But Karen and the others were beyond answering him now. Their song built to a crescendo, and with it came a response. A deep, resonant vibration that shook the entire facility. The reinforced glass of Zach's tank cracked, then shattered. Water and Boy exploded outward, but instead of flopping helplessly on the laboratory floor, he propelled himself with the powerful sweeps of his tail, gliding across the wet tiles directly toward the emergency exit. The other tanks began to rupture in sequence, releasing their captives. The scientists and guards fled, all protocol forgotten in the face of primal fear, not of the transformed humans, but of what was coming for them. Karen found herself beside Diane, both of them moving in an awkward half-slither, half-crawl toward where Zach waited by a sealed door marked Ocean Access. Authorized personnel only. "He knows the way," Diane said, her voice thick with the effort of speaking in air. He can sense it. Emily joined them, supporting Jessica, whose transformation had left her less mobile on land. Martin brought up the rear, his clawed hands proving surprisingly useful for propulsion. As they reached the door, another violent tremor shook the facility. The lights failed completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the red glow of emergency exit signs. "It's helping us," Zach said, his melodic voice somehow carrying despite the chaos. "It's breaking their walls." As if in response to his words, the reinforced door before them buckled, then tore from its hinges, revealing a long, sloping tunnel illuminated by emergency lighting. At its end, they could see darkness and movement, water. Ocean water. They moved as quickly as their transformed bodies would allow, driven by instinct and the song still echoing in their minds. Behind them, they could hear shouts, the sound of boots on wet floors, security forces regrouping. "They'll kill us if they catch us," Martin said, his voice guttural through his increasingly non-human vocal cords. "They won't catch us," Karen replied with certainty she didn't question. They reached the end of the tunnel, a loading dock of some kind where the facility connected directly to the ocean. The cool night air hit their sensitive skin, but it was the sight of the water, dark and vast and waiting, that took their breath away. Zap was the first to dive, his iridescent form catching the moonlight before disappearing beneath the surface. One by one, the others followed, their bodies finally in the environment they had been remade for. Karen was the last to enter the water. She paused at the edge, looking back at the facility, at the world of humans she was leaving behind. Her divorce, her petty competitions with neighbors, her desperate need for validation. All of it seemed so small now, so meaningless. The door at the far end of the tunnel burst open. Silhouetted figures with weapons appeared. Karen turned away from them and dove. The ocean embraced her. Cold, yes, but not uncomfortable to her new physiology. Dark, but her transformed eyes adjusted instantly, revealing a twilight world of shapes and shadows. She moved with power and grace she had never known as a human, her webbed hands and feet propelling her deeper with each stroke. Ahead of her, the others swam in formation, following Zach, who led them unerringly away from the shore, toward the deep waters above the trench. They were moving faster than should have been possible, as if carried by invisible currents. There, Emily's voice carried through the water, a new form of communication they were all discovering. Look. Below them, rising from the blackness of the abyss, came a soft blue-green luminescence, the same color as Karen's pool had been. But this was no pool. This was vast, pulsing, alive. As they watched, the light resolved itself into a shape, something like a massive jellyfish, but with structures and appendages that defied categorization. The being from a branch of evolution so distant from their own that the human mind could scarcely comprehend it. 1 year later, the coastal town of Seacliff Point was experiencing its busiest tourist season in decades. People flocked from across the country, drawn by rumors of strange lights in the deep waters offshore and mysterious figures glimpsed in the moonlit surf. Local fishermen told stories of unprecedented catches and schools of fish that seemed to follow their boats, almost as if guiding them to the richest waters. Environmental scientists were baffled by the sudden recovery of once-dying coral reefs and the return of species long thought extinct in these waters. Marine biologists documented unprecedented behaviors in local sea life, complex patterns of movement and communication they couldn't explain. And then there were the dreams. Residents of Seacliff Point reported vivid, shared dreams of underwater cities, ancient knowledge, and warnings about coming changes to the Earth's climate and oceans. Many dismissed these as mass hysteria, a collective delusion fueled by social media and suggestible minds. But some listened, some understood. Dr. Elliot Thorne was one of them. He sat alone on the cliffside bench where he had spent every evening for the past 3 months watching the sunset fade into darkness. Below him, the ocean stirred restlessly, the surface glinting with occasional flashes of blue-green light. He had lost everything after the incident, as the government now called it. His position, his funding, his reputation, all gone. The official story was that a rogue researcher had contaminated several civilians with an experimental compound, resulting in fatal poisoning. The bodies, they claimed, had never been recovered due to the hazardous nature of the contaminant. Thorne knew better. So did Agent Rivera, though she would never admit it publicly. She had been reassigned to desk duty in some forgotten branch office, punishment for letting the subjects escape. A sound of footsteps on the gravel path behind him pulled Thorne from his thoughts. He turned to see a teenage boy approaching, maybe 14 or 15, with striking blue eyes and hair so pale it was almost silver. "Dr. Thorne?" the boy asked. Thorne nodded cautiously. "I have a message for you." The boy held out a small object, a smooth stone that glowed faintly in the growing darkness. Thorne hesitated, then took it. The moment his fingers closed around the stone, his mind filled with images, the depths of the ocean, the entity's pulsing light, and faces he recognized. Karen, Martin, Emily, Jessica, Diane, and Zach, though he had changed so much that Thorne would never have recognized him without context. They were alive, thriving, and they were not alone. Others had joined them, more transformed humans, some by design, some by accident. A community was forming in the deep, growing stronger with each passing month. "They want you to know," the boy said, "that they're coming to the surface soon. Not all of them, just the ones who can still pass as human for short periods. They have information, critical information about the changes coming to the oceans, about what your species needs to do to survive." "My species," Thorne echoed. "Aren't you human?" The boy smiled enigmatically. "I was born this way. My mother swam too close to the entity while pregnant. I'm something in between. A natural bridge." Thorne studied the boy's face more carefully. There was something familiar in his features. "You're Raymond Kessler's son," he realized suddenly. Yes, he knew what he was doing when he created the pool compound. He just didn't know how quickly it would work or how complete the transformation would be. "Is he with them, with Karen and the others?" The boy nodded. He was the first to fully understand what the entity wants, what it's been trying to communicate for centuries. "And what is that?" "Symbiosis," the boy said simply. "Coexistence. The entity has been watching humanity destroy the oceans while simultaneously developing the capacity to save them. It wants to help guide your technology, your innovation, toward healing rather than harm." "Why now?" Thorne asked. "Because there's little time left," the boy replied gravely. "The oceans are reaching tipping points faster than your scientists realize. And because the entity finally found a way to communicate effectively with humans, through those who have been transformed." Thorne looked down at the glowing stone in his palm. "What do they want from me?" "They need someone on the surface who understands. Someone who can help facilitate meetings with the right people, scientists, policymakers, innovators. Someone who won't try to capture them or exploit them." "I'm a discredited scientist," Thorne said bitterly. "No one listens to me anymore." "But you have access," the boy countered. "You know who to contact, how to arrange things quietly, and you understand what's at stake." Thorne was silent for a long moment, watching the mysterious lights dancing beneath the ocean's surface. Then he closed his fingers around the stone and felt a surge of certainty that wasn't entirely his own. "Tell them I'll help," he said finally. "When will they come?" "The first meeting is already arranged," the boy said with a smile that wasn't quite human. "Tomorrow night, full moon, the cove at the north end of the beach. Bring only those who are open-minded enough to listen and willing to act." As the boy turned to leave, Thorn called after him. "Wait, what happened to Karen? She was the first, wasn't she? The center of it all?" The boy paused. "Karen found her purpose," he said. "She leads our community now. Her understanding of human psychology, combined with her bond with the entity, makes her uniquely qualified to bridge our worlds." Thorn couldn't help but laugh. Karen Whitman, the woman who installed an experimental pool just to make her neighbors jealous. "People change, Dr. Thorn," the boy said, his eyes reflecting the moonlight in a way that no human eyes should. "Sometimes they need to become something else entirely to discover who they truly are." With that, he walked away, his footsteps impossibly light on the gravel path. A moment later, Thorn heard a splash as the boy entered the water. Standing, Thorn pocketed the glowing stone and began the walk back to his small rental cottage. He had calls to make, arrangements to set in motion. For the first time in a year, he felt a sense of purpose returning. Karen Whitman had thrown a pool party that changed her guests into something beyond human. Now those transformed partygoers were